When a geographically separated population becomes isolated, it may encounter different ecological partners, or maybe it's subjected to different pressures than the original population. So, for instance, maybe an isolated group might develop new relationships with local predators or pollinators, or different relationship with a competitor. And that can trigger a very unique, what we call coevolutionary dynamic that may not have been seen in the other group. So coevolution is the process by which two or more species influence each other's evolution. So in these interactions, a change in one species, like maybe they have created a new defense mechanism, or they change their behavior, or some other trait, and that creates selective pressure for an adaptive response in the other species. So we see coevolution mainly in groups that are tightly linked together, or have very tightly linked relationships. So, for instance, we would call these like predator-prey relationships, or parasite-host relationships, or a plant and its pollinator. So the success of each species kind of depends on how well it adapts to the traits of the other one. So in our image here, we've got a flower that has kind of a tube shape, and at the base of it is where it has its nectar. So these flowers are best pollinated by pollinators that have either a very long proboscis, which is the case of a hawk moth, that has adapted to have a very long proboscis, or kind of long tongue, that allows them to reach down into the nectar. Or in this case, we can see a hummingbird that also has a very long, narrow beak that can get down in there. And so this is important because then pollen can be attached to the pollinator, and when the pollinator goes to the next flower, it can help to spread that pollen to the next one. So plants benefit because they have specialized pollinators. And so that increases their chances of reproduction. And of course, for the pollinator, they are getting a food source, a rich food source. Another example of this would be the relationship between the cuckoo bird and the host birds. So cuckoos actually lay their eggs in the nests of other bird species that are different from them. And they basically lay their eggs in the nest, and they let the other bird raise their chicks. So, and this is kind of great, it gets to reproduce, pass on its genes, but it doesn't have to take care of the little chicks. So the host birds, the ones where the cuckoo lays their eggs in, they try to defend themselves against this, because why would they want to spend all that energy raising the chicks of a different bird? So they have learned to recognize the eggs of the cuckoo bird, and they will kind of roll them out of the nest, and so they'll fall out and die. So in response, over time, cuckoos have evolved eggs that closely mimic the color and the pattern of the host bird's eggs, so that now the host bird can't detect the cuckoo eggs. So this in turn then puts selective pressure on a host that can develop even more precise egg recognition capabilities, right? So if they can somehow detect, maybe there's a different scent to the cuckoo bird eggs than their own eggs. So something else that they'll have to detect. So we see this kind of back and forth that occurs with coevolution, where one member develops some new adaptation that helps them to kind of outwit that predator, and then the predator then evolves another adaptation that enables them to catch that prey once again. So it kind of goes back and forth. Now, another mode of speciation is by what we call ecological isolation. So ecological isolation occurs when populations occupy different habitats or use different resources, but it's all within the same geographic area. It's all within the same spot. So even though the populations live close enough to interact with each other, they have different preferences that kind of reduce or eliminate any opportunity for them to mate together. So over time, the separation kind of limits gene flow between them, and adaptations start to accumulate, and that then keeps them reproductively isolated, so they can't reproduce with each other over long periods of time. This occurs. And this leads to what we call sympatric speciation. So it's a mode of speciation that is a result of some change in genetic material that produces reproductively isolated populations in the midst of the original population. So there's no geographic barrier here that is separating the population at all. They all kind of live in the same area, but something else is keeping them from interacting over extensive periods of time. So the example that we have here is the cichlid fish that live in Lake Victoria. So there's deemed to be close to 500 species of cichlid fishes that live in Lake Victoria. And the DNA analysis of these species kind of trace them all back to probably about 2 ancestral species. And these 2 fish lived close to about 100,000 years ago. And from those 2 fish, we have close to 500 species today. So many of these fish who are, once again, we got 500 species of fish, let's say, living in Lake Victoria. So it's still one lake, right? It's not like there's a lot of different habitat there. But what we see happening is sympatric speciation. So this occurs right in the midst of the original parent population. So for the fish, we've got on the right here in the image, it shows one fish that feeds on insects. We've got another one who's kind of in the middle of the water column that feeds on other fish, chasing after them. And then we have those who are down on the benthos, feeding off of snails and other mollusks. And we got another one that's called just a generalized bottom feeder. So these individuals have developed differences between them over time that keeps them reproductively isolated. So even though they're all in the same area, they're not reproducing with each other. So it could be just that they're occupying different areas in the water column like this, and the one that feeds on the top with the insects simply is not swimming down to the bottom to ever come across the more benthic species. Could be the one in the middle that feeds on other fish, has developed adaptations that make them faster swimmers or something. And you see there's, color variations as well. So it could be that they blended with the bottom more so than the ones at the top who were trying to keep from being noticed above water. So there could be a lot of differences that accumulate in these organisms over time simply because of where they're living within that habitat and how they're feeding. Right? So over time, genetic differences accumulate, leading to the formation of distinct species, even though they continue living in the same area. Now, another well-known example of sympatric speciation is the apple maggot fly. Originally, these flies laid their eggs on the fruit of native hawthorn trees. So hawthorn trees occur here in the United States, and they make little red berries in the late fall. So when the leaves all drop, you can see the little red berries. Then apples were introduced to North America, and some of the flies began using apples to lay their eggs on and to kind of just hang out on instead of the hawthorn trees. Now, because apples and hawthorns ripen at different times, so apples you've got in late summer and early fall, and then late fall you've got the hawthorn berries. The two groups started mating at different times of the year, and they were mating on different host plants. So even though they lived in the same geographic area, the hawthorns and the apple trees, the trees occurred together, but over many generations, there was this shift in host preference, and that reduced the gene flow between the flies that were living on the apple trees versus the flies that were living on the hawthorn trees. And that caused them to diverge genetically and begin forming different species.